Is that orc within 30 feet? Is the captain in my line of sight or not? What do you mean the Balrog's whip can reach me all the way up here? As the GM in a role-playing game, you're expected to know all of that instantly and to perfectly present an unambiguous scene to all of your players. So we break out the grids and the tokens, and we measure the inches, and we estimate the ranges. But once we think we have it all figured out, then a new RPG comes along that we want to try, and it measures distance differently than our preferred method. But the truth is, every method of measuring distance in RPGs is flawed. And until you analyze the pros and cons of each one, your job as a DM is harder than it needs to be. So today, we're going to crush that analysis into like 12 minutes and ultimately save you time debating distance at your table, especially when the Balrog is falling diagonally away from the bridge. Because I'm Bob, this is where we learn how to have more fun playing RPGs together. And let's start with the default measurement method of Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Grids. Wait, what? Grids are a variant rule? Then what is it? Measuring feet. So you probably know that a D&D character or monster speed is listed as a distance in feet, with 30 feet being the default. But I had a little aha moment when I read the latest version of this rule. Check it out. While I change location, because there's definitely a ton of bees in this log. However you're moving with your speed, you deduct the distance of each part of your move from it until it is used up or until you are done moving, whichever comes first. So rules as written, we ought to be thinking about speed exactly like HP or a video game stamina bar, deducting the distance as we move based on the type of movement. Sidebar, with that approach, one pro of measuring feet that I don't think D&D takes advantage of, let me know in the comments, could be refilling a chunk of that speed bar during your turn when you land an attack or take a special potion or do anything else that might invigorate your character. But generally, the D&D speed bar only depletes at various rates. For example, every foot of movement in difficult terrain costs 1 extra foot. And from the rules glossary, high jump. When you make a high jump, you leap into the air a number of feet. Okay, the jump was silly, that's where I wanted the text to go. You leap into the air a number of feet equal to 3 plus your strength modifier, minimum 0 feet if you move at least 10 feet on foot immediately before the jump. And whoa, this jumping rule goes on for quite a bit, exemplifying the biggest pros and cons of measuring foot by foot. You can achieve incredibly precise measurements without a grid or even a map, just minis and tokens and a measuring tape or string, and most measurements will be pretty fast. But it's still the most tedious method, especially if you have a single character trying to jump in difficult terrain. However, this is all under the rules for combat, suggesting that you don't need to track speed outside of battle. And there's definitely a need for speed joke in there somewhere.
I got nothing but time.
So really, this jumping rule also exemplifies how D&D 5e can be simultaneously crunchy as heck and extremely accessible. Because when a character merely jumps up to grab a ledge, you can either have the player just roll an athletics check, or you can calculate the high jump, then have the result for the standing high jump, then multiply by the character's height 1.5 and add that result to the total, then compare the total to the height of the ledge just to find out, oh, you're actually 1 foot too short. And that, my friends, is the big con most people don't talk about for this method. As you increase the precision of your measurements, combined with the D&D default of rounding down, you also increase the chance of failing to reach whatever you're trying to reach. And that's not fun. And finally, let's try something. Look at the screen. Unless you're driving, you gotta focus on the road. But if you can, take a guess. How far away am I from you right now? 30 feet? 35 feet? Ooh, what if it's actually 34? Joke's on you, I'm probably many miles away and in the past. Nah, I am actually 24 feet away from the camera right now. And some folks with impeccable spatial reasoning will be sure to say so in the comments. But the point is, unless everyone in your group has both impeccable spatial reasoning and they can clearly hold that precise image in their mind's eye throughout the fight, you need minis or tokens with this method, because these foot-by-foot measurements do not translate well to theater of the mind. So personally, I prefer methods that round out distances and work seamlessly both in and out of battle. And the next best option to achieve this is D&D's popular variant rule, grids. Now, maybe the biggest con against grids is that you need a seemingly infinite supply of gridded maps to play on. And fortunately, today's sponsor has your back. Chepeku has thousands of fantasy RPG battle maps for every kind of location, with gridded versions, animated versions, and with tons of variants for every map. And now on Chepeku's own website, you can get their 6,000 plus maps and 2,000 plus scenes and 300 plus tokens with the complete fantasy bundle. That's 3 subscriptions for the price of 2. Or hey, if you only want the token builder tool and library because it includes my own Orc Barbarian Hantu, then you can just join one of these libraries instead of the whole bundle. But for any of Chepeku's content, the site makes it easy to find exactly the right map for your adventures and battles, and you can use my link below so they know who sent you. The grid method is so popular, in fact, that many combat-focused RPGs use grids not as a variant, but as their default method of measuring distance, such as DC 20, Draw Steel, and Nimble. Let's check out that one. Character speed is how fast they can move, which, unless otherwise noted, is 6. Often play is done on a grid with 1-inch squares or hexagons, representing roughly 5 feet or 1 meter each. So a hero with a speed of 6 can travel up to 6 spaces horizontally or diagonally. Effectively, you also track these spaces like a stamina bar, and there's a similar restriction to D&D on difficult terrain. Speed halved while here, but there are no draconian measurements for jump distance, you just use dice rolls, and Nimble has a couple character features that can essentially refill your speed bar, like we mentioned earlier. Still, the main con of using grids is that you lose a lot of precision. You're literally measuring with a coarser scale, rounding to the nearest 5 feet or 1 meter, aka 1 space. And while you save time on calculations, when it comes to most movement, I personally find it a little faster to just slide a mini a few inches rather than count out a few squares, especially with diagonal movement. Thankfully, Nimble builds in a few pros that you should totally steal for any game with a grid. 1, you round numbers neither up nor down by default, but always in favor of the heroes. That's a fun idea. 2, you count diagonal spaces just like horizontal spaces, way less tedious, but you do cause poor Pythagoras to roll in his triangular grave. 3, you rules as written count spaces, not squares, so the game is fully compatible with hexagons, the superior form of grid, though much harder to find maps for. And Nimble's on my brain right now because I got a whole review coming next week, so stay tuned, but for now, let's check out the weirdest method for measuring distance and movement, zones. I've only ever played one session of one RPG that used zones by default, but zones are how I often imagine the battlefield in RPGs. There's a road through the middle, the climbable cliff on one side, the mucky ponds on the other side, with a treasure chest sticking out, and just draw a midfield line because it takes about 1 movement to run down the road. The main pro here, movement is so easy, just 1 move to get from one zone to another, and obviously you can cover 2 zones by dashing, or you take an extra turn to get through difficult terrain. But the main con, distance is tricky. Who can I hit with my 15-foot spell cone? How does my 10-foot reach glaive work now? Does my character with 35 feet of movement just lose that cool bonus? Of course, games that use zones as their default probably define all their weapons and spells and effects by a number of zones for distance, but since I don't play games like that, I find that zones are easier to grasp, especially in theater of the mind, when you conform them to my favorite method for measuring distance and movement, range bands. And don't worry, this is a different log than the B log. Daggerheart, Shadow Dark, Index Card RPG, and many, many more. Honestly, even D&D 5e. could be considered a range band game because they list specific terms for specific measurements. Melee, 5 feet. Reach, 10 feet. Movement, 30 feet. Dash, 60, you get the idea. So one obvious con is that unlike plain numbers of feet or squares, these terms are not universal. Publishers can't agree on how to name these ranges, and this highlights and stems from another con. The terms are not intuitive to new players. Close and near are just synonyms. And sure, very close is clearly shorter than close, but you just have to internalize that very close is different from and not closer than melee. Therefore, in my eventual fantasy RPG, I will use terms probably like melee, short range, mid-range, and far range, because those seem intuitive and unambiguous. So I don't know why anybody else hasn't developed that yet. Either I'm innovating or I'm missing an obvious flaw. And the biggest con here is, for me, the biggest pro. Rounding to about 30 feet loses a lot of precision, but it also makes combat so fast and cinematic because any given thing is either in reach or it's a number of moves away. Thus, when I'm running D&D 5e or Dungeon Crawl Classics, both of which have 15-foot cones, 10-foot polearms, and those tiny 5-foot bonuses and penalties to speed, I still use range bands, but I always rule in favor of the fun, giving the benefit of the doubt that in any close call, yes, an attack with a polearm can reach a little farther than the melee range band should, and yes, those minor penalties and bonuses to a creature's speed will actually matter when it counts. But sometimes, man, I'm really tempted to use the final method. Everything is either in reach or it's not. It's either here or it's there, hither or thither. That is exactly my approach in the non-fantasy, Pokemon-inspired TTRPG that I've had drafted for months, but it's still going to take a while to do some graphic design and get artwork done for the playtest doc. But anyway, be sure to share your preferred method in the comments, and if you want to hear more about my group's preferred combat rules, check out this old but popular video on your screen. Remember to give this one a thumbs up, and thank you patrons and YouTube members for making it all happen. Keep building.